I can't be the only player that makes Commander Shephard resemble themselves. Well, it's not me, but a fantasy version of who I'd like to be. As a result, despite knowing Mark Mayer and considering him a personal friend, I don't hear Mark when listening to Shephard's voice. I hear myself. Or rather, Shephard. I had planned on this video for some time, addressing my opinions regarding Mass Effect, probably my favorite game franchise of all time. That's an opinion, not a fact. This is an analysis of the franchise as a total work, while rendering, we'll call it, educated opinions on what I consider to be unfounded assumptions made by other fans in other videos. This is not to discredit or humiliate them, I just disagree with their logic. Also, a large chunk of this video will involve speculating on what could be considered the canon story of Mass Effect. I employ the framework surrounding the rumors of a Mass Effect TV series. This is a thought experiment and nothing more. This video will involve the following subjects. 1. Is there a canonical story to Mass Effect? 2. Can we establish canon via a combination of player consensus and design intent? 3. If there is canon, should it be adhered to regarding different mediums? 4. What could a theorized Mass Effect TV show look like? And 5. Is establishing canon mandatory for the franchise to continue in future games? Let's start by looking at how I came to this game. It first hit Xbox, but I would have to wait for its rather buggy PC port sometime later. I was immediately enraptured with its setting and writing while fighting against the game's numerous issues. My playthrough of the original Mass Effect is marred in distant memory, so most of my analysis comes from the recent revisit with the Legendary Edition. And I was shocked how short the original Mass Effect is. The length of that original playthrough came from a youthful obsession at being a completionist, coupled with my desire to experiment with multiple choices in alternative plays. As such, my prime Shepherd is the male Shep, or bro Shep, as I already alluded to. Most of my choices were Paragon, allowing my fem Shep to take on, let's say, a more sinister persona. I followed this up with the game's 2 sequels, creating a pair of very distinct experiences by the end. Like most male players, I flirted with both Ashley and Liara, but when it came down to deciding, I opted for Liara, despite my choice coming out of a lack of options. Appealing characters were judged initially on how often they were selected for missions, and in Mass Effect, this often came from necessity. You see, my Shepherd was a spacer, someone that lived most, if not all of his life on spaceships. Following a military family, a vocation I was expected to abide by. Despite a decorated career, my history was marred by an unfortunate encounter on the planet Akuz, where I was the only survivor of my unit. A colorful history. I was not gifted in biotics and followed the traditional military background as a soldier, an option many other players would end up taking. Given the parameters of the first game, it became essential to create a broad spectrum of talent within one's team. As I was a soldier, it became essential to populate the other 2 members accompanying me with contrasting skills. In this case, someone blessed with biotics and someone talented in engineering. As a result, my team often included Liara and Tali, more often the latter, as Liara could be swapped by Kaidan or even Rex. Ashley survived Vermeer, Rex was spared, and I saved the Council. Like everyone, I put Captain Anderson on the Council. I purchased Mass Effect 2 day 1 and fell in love with its improved writing and well-defined characters. When Kelly Chambers opened up about Tali, this exchange occurs.
I had a wonderful chat with your friend Tali. She's not what I expected from her psych report. I like her.
Tally's a good friend. We've been through a lot together.
My female intuition says she wants to be more than just good friends.
And this was my actual reaction. What? Tali? No. Tali? You must be. Really? You notice that? Huh. That's, Huh. Well, I was shocked because I wasn't aware at that point that Tali had become a potential love interest. As you might expect, Tali was my preference from the first game, and I really only picked Liara because she was the better of the 2 options in the first game. When Liara gave me the cold shoulder on Ilium, I figured this gave me the green light to pursue my favorite Quarian, and literally this was my only goal in the game. Save the colonies, destroy the collectors, all secondary by this point. Sure, when we got to Lair the Shadow Broker, there was an awkward conversation, but that was a small price to pay. My first playthrough was not terribly successful by the end. Legion was killed, and as was my entire crew of secondary characters, as I took too long to make the run through the Omega-4 relay. My fault. I thought I was playing a game, and didn't realize a hidden clock was running down. A second pass ensured 100% survival for everyone involved. I ordered Mass Effect 3 online, and it arrived nearly a week late. I avoided spoilers, but was informed by a friend outside the franchise that there was a growing discontent about the game, especially regarding the ending. I couldn't see how anyone could hate the game by that point. I was really into it. I cured the Krogan with more than sacrifice. I, for some reason, forgot a Rannoch mission and hadn't acquired enough assets to broker peace between the Geth and Quarians, and, well, Tali. So Legion and his people were killed. Upon reaching the ending, well, I had issues. I won't repeat what everyone else had already said ad nauseum, except that I had earned enough for the synthesis ending, but felt it was a piss-poor choice. Since then, additional playthroughs had ensured a maximum war asset value to secure the only option for Shepard's survival at the end of the Red Destroy ending. But upon reflection, I couldn't look past the numerous issues that started to encroach nearly 2 hours prior. The entire Citadel moves. How is never shown. We're never told what happens to the millions of people on the station, a station Shepard and many others had been using as a refugee zone. This left a substantial sour taste in my mouth. What happened to the two people that ran with me to the light? And why could I not fight against the flawed logic of that catalyst? And flawed it was. The designer's intent was to make each ending a mixture of positive and negative. If you perform poorly, only the destroy and control endings are available. If you do good, the synthesis ending becomes available, implying it is a secret, better ending. At least that's the implication, an ending that proved incredibly unpopular with many fans. The blue control ending is bizarrely the only one where the most people can be happy without implying an ethical fallacy. If you did really well in the game, both the Quarians and the Geth will have survived, but if you pick the destroy ending, all mechanical life with a Reaper code is killed, including the Geth and EDI. This is alluded to so ungraciously that you're never directly told these individuals are killed. You never see EDI and the Geth die, you just notice EDI's name on the casualty board. Rather flippant, if you ask me, almost as if the creators assumed no one would pick this option. The problem with the green synthesis ending is that despite how utopian the ending is presented, it occurs on the condition that one person forced a permanent choice on every creature in the galaxy. It turns Shepard into an egotistical personality who feels they know better and is willing to make a choice without consent. It's an evolutionary assault if you want to get to the extreme of this logic. I truly believe the game writers did not thoroughly analyze or deconstruct this ending, and it has proven to be one of the least popular selections. Ironically, the blue control ending is the only one where you don't impose your will upon the bodies of every creature in the galaxy and where you don't commit tangential genocide. You control the Reapers and repair the relays and help the galaxy rebuild. However, this does come with its own ethical dilemma, something, oddly enough, Michael Straczynski covered in Babylon 5.
You've lost your way. So how can you guide us? How can we learn who we are and what we want if you don't even know it anymore?
It doesn't matter which side wins this today. 1,000 years from now, it'll start all over again. They're as trapped in this cycle as much as we are. But we can't afford it anymore. We don't need it. We don't need you. We've learned how to stand on our own. We'll make mistakes, but they'll be our mistakes, not yours. We know who we are now. We can find our own way between order and chaos. It's over because we've decided it's over. Now get the hell out of our galaxy!
It's about the younger races being left alone, given a chance to make their own choices, to forge their own future. By controlling the Reapers, Shepard never offers the younger races a chance for that. The hanging threat of godlike machines will ever be present. The three endings ultimately create a situation where there is no good option. Upon watching literally dozens of videos made by other people, I discovered that nearly everyone picks destroy despite the consequential loss of artificial life. Most people justify it by claiming that destroying the Reapers was always the intent. But honestly, I think it comes down to a straightforward fact. There's a chance Shepard lives. It's a selfish choice, but an honest one. Not everyone is willing to sacrifice themselves, and when presented with three pedestrian and clearly manipulative choices, It's understanding that Shephard would just want to end things. Even with the extended ending DLC, despite more conversation options being added, at no point is Shephard allowed to call the catalyst on its, well, bullshit. At no point during the game's final revelations does Shephard call out the ridiculous fact that a race of machines wipe out all advanced intelligent life in the galaxy every 50,000 years before they can erect machines that will wipe out all advanced life in the galaxy. Because Shephard never calls out the catalyst for this fallacy, I assume that the writers never considered this problem. The extended cut DLC could not retcon the ending. All it could do is try to explain itself better, creating scenes to better wrap up plot holes. The Mass Effect relays broke down, they didn't explode, your two comrades were killed, they were pulled out before you yeeted into the transport beam. It points to the game's creators scrambling to explain situations they were forced into making. There is considerable evidence that the ending of Mass Effect 3 was rushed. The ending was potentially forced. Its accelerated development created plot holes that the extended DLC tried to patch around without rewriting the actual ending. Now the other two members of your unit are injured, and you're forced to have them evacuated. But wait, the Normandy was up in space, and suddenly it arrives to pick up survivors? Harbinger had just spent the last minute phasering everything in sight, but upon the Normandy's landing, it just hangs there, waiting. And if the Normandy could land this close to the beam, why not just fly everyone right to the beam's frontier? Unfortunately, the game created more plot holes by forcing this explanation. I know I'm coming off as highly critical, but don't worry, I don't do it that much. Despite that, we all embraced these new scenes as they allowed us one final goodbye to our potential love interest. About that, don't you find it weird you always take the person you love on suicidal missions? Weird. I'll be addressing that again soon. The three endings were so wildly divergent that the sequel, Andromeda, took colonists outside of the range of the Reapers into a new galaxy 600 years in the future, to create a follow-up that avoided the ramifications of Shepard's choice. After playing the original trilogy numerous times back then, and again recently with the Legendary Edition, I came to realize new patterns previously unseen, appreciating the work that went into the whole project. It must have been daunting. By the end of Mass Effect 1, there are a half-dozen critical choices that could very well drastically alter the events of the sequel. Caden or Ashley, a living or dead Rex, the fate of the Council, and mankind's role in the future. Mass Effect 2 took note, but found ways to avoid too much work by sidelining all the previous potential dead or romance characters. However, Mass Effect 2 went and created more consequences, with Shepard deciding the fate of damn near everyone. In fact, by the end of Mass Effect 3, only two characters cannot in any way be killed, Joker and Liara. I can only imagine the workload the team had put on themselves, maybe even more daunting when considering the protracted timeline EA gave the developers. It forced them to enact what I came to call triage. Think about it. Consider every choice and the potential butterfly effect that each one could have in the future. If BioWare truly wanted every choice to spiral into its own direction, the final game would have taken 10 years to finish. And given the graphical demands of modern players, it's not like the creators could use still images and 8-bit graphics. This is not the PS1 era. It's not easy to create divergent endings like Chrono Trigger. I never played that game. A more relatable comparison would be 1997's Blade Runner. Wow, I'm old. Throughout the game, it randomizes certain variables, if certain characters are replicants or not, including the main character. You can choose to spare or hunt down every target. This can twist into different endings that are so contrary they occur in different parts of the city with completely different arcs. A supplementary NPC suddenly becomes the focus of the game's last act. Pursuing the replicants that encompass the game's majority can be wholly abandoned. Your partner can die from a mine or by your own gun. When you find who survived your entire playthrough, you can join them, or gun them all down. This was easy when all you needed to do was record dialogue and alter a handful of pixels. When it comes to a game of the scale of Mass Effect, such possibilities become untenable. This is proven when several ex-BioWare developers spun off to form their own company and game, the Banner Saga. In that, dozens of variables are up for players' choosing, leading to a final game where a variety of endings as broad as one can imagine are presented. This was easier given that the game's story is conveyed through text and still images. It does potentially create situations where you may end up with an ending that requires a day one restart from the first game to change one's fate. Mass Effect could not do this, especially given the sheer amount of recordable dialogue required. For example, this sequence in the Citadel DLC, it's a simple, short scene that requires 20 minutes of alternative dialogue for every possible permutation, and that's just for a single throwaway scene. The work compounded to such a degree as to make the scope of Mass Effect 3 practically unattainable to realize. This forced the developers to create a satisfying experience for most players. This brings up the primary topic of this video regarding what is, if anything, canon. Is there a definitive storyline that we all just wander in? There are two factors to consider on the subject: the game writer's intent and the player's choices. Does an audience have the right to impose their preferences in art? If it's popular art, absolutely. Film and TV do this all the time, and the writers of BioWare are no exception. The inclusion of Tali and Garrus as romantic interests in Mass Effect 2 came directly as a result of fan feedback. The inclusion of LGBTQ options finally came to fruition in Mass Effect 3 after considerable campaign from players. The choices we make within a game are also taken into consideration. If the creators wanted to hide behind the shield of artistic integrity, they shouldn't have capitulated in the first place. This brings us to this image. I'll be showing this and several others, attempts to collate the popular choices players have made across the franchise. For example, it confirms that Soldier is the most popular class option, more popular than the next two combined. This points to a potential justification for why Tali became such a popular character. While this was not mandated in later games, including an engineer in Mass Effect 1 to hack the various computers found along the mission was compulsory. And as we can see, engineer only accounted for 5% of class selections. And considering the brunt of the other choices include biotic variations, it justifies why NPCs like Garrus and Rex prove popular. When it comes to Shepard's background, choices become a bit more mixed. Survivor and War Hero are practically neck and neck, while Earthborn is the dominant choice for one's origin. For the most part, my choices coincide with the consensus, except on this one aspect. You'll be hearing that a lot, by the way, consensus, what the majority of players choose or subscribe to. And it's clear that BioWare listens, as it allows them to focus on certain storylines while intentionally neglecting others. 94% of players save Rex, and BioWare writers have often commented on the callousness of players that elected to kill him. Only 7% killed the Arachni Queen, though a more extensive group finally killed her in Mass Effect 3. Almost the entire aggregate of fans cured the genophage and exonerated Tali. And as I suspected, Garrus and Tali were the most popular NPC choices in the first game. However, I'm still a little shocked that a mostly Paragon audience would punch an unarmed reporter in the face. That's been confirmed, by the way. Despite renegade choices being available constantly throughout the franchise, the vast majority of players go for a nice Shepard, often proving that most people would elect to be kind in their minds. Reality can often disagree. These results came from the recent Legendary Edition. When we look at the previous release, way back when Mass Effect 3 came out, we see a shocking variation. The percentage of people that did not cure the genophage fell from 8%. 37% chose the Geth, while 27% selected the Quarians. Only 36% was able to do both, a massive shift from the Legendary Edition, which had both saved at an impressive 80%. What can I say? The benefit of hindsight. I don't really have a point with this. I just thought it was cool noticing how people approach the story now. Choice has always been a factor in the series. Like, did you know you could hold off rescuing Liara for nearly half of the first game? Or that you can reject Garrus and Rex entirely? If you do, the latter doesn't appear in Mass Effect 2, a situation duplicated if Rex is killed. Garrus is a stranger that is less eager to trust the players. Every choice in the first game is remembered to be resonated later. The fate of the Pharaoh's colony, the fate of the Destiny Ascension, Conrad Werner, Fist and Jenna in Korra's Den, Helena Blake. The thing is, most of the consequences of these actions don't really affect the story later on. You'll receive an email or a conversation from a survivor, and in the final game, a moderate increase to your war assets, a single cumulative value of everything you have ever done, which may seem extraordinary until you realize that this value can only affect the conclusion of the synthesis ending and the survivability of Shepard in the Destroy ending. At the end of the day, that's really it. Of course, this ignores the later work made by the Extended Cut DLC, but outside of these still images, you cannot prevent the death of Anderson, and the elusive man always dies. Shepard still collapses and is still elevated to be talked down by a sociopathic digital toddler. In situations like this, a case can be made that specific plot points are assumed canonical. At least you can find canonical choices not so much based on popular choices, but rather by eliminating the unpopular or illogical ones. Like, did you know Shephard can die in Mass Effect 2? Not a mission critical failure death, a mission success, and Shephard still dies? But if this is considered your preferred ending, and it's not for anyone, then Mass Effect 3 literally cannot happen. It's safe to assume that Shephard dying at the end of ME2 is not canonical. In the extended ending, a new option is offered allowing you to shoot the synthetic brat, resulting in the total extinction of everyone, everywhere. I think it's safe to say that this can in no way be considered canonical despite the temptation. And there are others. A Reddit user ran an extensive survey with more than 5,000 responders, an enormous sample size. And most of these choices coincide with figures Bioware released. Broship is selected 70% of the time. Backstory matches up pretty well, except one's origin now skews more an even split between Spacer and Earthborn. But this graph points out how well the Bioware writers can predict player choice, leading to a consensus between fans and writers. Rex is talked down in 92% of all games. Remember, when Bioware accounts for choice, it often includes alternative plays where games intentionally go against the grain just to see different paths. The Council will save nearly 80% of the time. While this is not an absolute majority, it comes close. Anderson is nearly always placed on the Council. With consensus, the writers of Mass Effect 3 were subsequently not required to create considerable content for Erdnot Reeve. Grunt was likely let out of the tank in a canonical story, considering he is in 99.5% of all games. Likewise with Activating Legion. No one picks Morinth. Despite this, offering choice compels the presenting of alternative options, despite how unpopular they are. But what I found interesting is the subtle compulsion by the writers to move in a specific direction regardless of what players picked. This is an obvious statement as Shephard in the Citadel above Earth cannot be avoided in any way. But how did we get here? No matter what happens, Saren dies, and Sovereign loses in Mass Effect 1. Moving into the second game, outside of these minor choices and character relationships, the story of Mass Effect 2 is actually relatively fixed. You can decide when to finally push onto the Omega-4 relay, but that is the mandatory destination. However, from here things get a little muddy. In Mass Effect 3, Anderson is with you on Earth, a bizarre choice considering he would have responsibilities as the Council chair on the Citadel most of the time. Except Udina is back on the Council in Mass Effect 3, meaning no matter what you choose in ME1, Udina is still on the Council in the last game. This is required considering he's a traitor. Spoilers. The Mass Effect Retribution novel explains Anderson's departure while simultaneously avoiding whatever you choose in Mass Effect 1, further reinforcing the idea that nothing Shephard does is canonical. Except Shephard will always turn himself in before the events in Mass Effect 3, regardless of what he does in ME2. Not only that, but a heavy renegade playthrough of ME2 points to similar motivations and a harmonized belief between Shephard and the elusive man. Shephard can agree with everything Martin Sheen does, but Cerberus is still the enemy in the third game regardless of this. A genius YouTube creator once experimented with the saddest party on the Citadel, creating a situation where most people die, leaving only Shephard, Liara, Joker, and Edie to attend the party. Clearly this is not canonical, but regardless, NPC inclusion or exclusion will not affect the course of the war. That collector base at the end of Mass Effect 2, you can elect to destroy it or enact a radiation surge that will kill everyone on board but keep the resident technology intact. As you might expect, the vast number of players elected to destroy it. But that choice doesn't matter. Regardless of what happens, remains of the Reaper corpse you destroyed will be found when raiding the Cerberus base at the end of Mass Effect 3. This moment doesn't change visually or narratively. The only thing that adjusts is a slight modification to conversations that occur before and during this moment. But nothing structurally changes with the story. Your war assets change slightly. That's it. So, despite the novels and comics doing everything in their power to avoid rendering canonical choices, some have been made, either around Shephard or fringing so close as to render certain assumptions. But in the case of the collector base and Udina, Bioware has intentionally diverted from consensus. Why? Well, because it was easier than creating two vastly different stories. If Udina is not on the council, then Cerberus cannot attack the Citadel, radically changing the rest of a very long game. If nothing was salvageable from the collector base, Cerberus never gains the knowledge required to create hybrids, and potentially even the elusive man doesn't fall to indoctrination. These possibilities are tempting and would have been welcomed if our choices had this much of an impact. But as stated, this would have been logistically impossible given budget and time constraints. The idea of a canonical Shephard may seem meaningless. I mean, why does it matter? Usually it wouldn't, except we now have 2 future scenarios that may compel it. The rumors of a streaming show based on Mass Effect and the confirmed upcoming Mass Effect game. While the former would point to forcing canonical Shephard, because fans would insist that such a show include them, with the latter, enforcing canon has been assumed, and I believe incorrectly. But I'll get into that later. Let's look at the potential of a TV show. This is that thought exercise I alluded to earlier. Despite my career in game writing, my background is in script writing, and I've worked as a script supervisor on a few occasions. In fact, my success in game writing has prevented me from furthering my other career, though I'm still hopeful for a shift in the not-too-distant future. So the idea of a Mass Effect show is appealing, and I got to thinking how it could be done. Like I said, despite the potential of adapting fringing fiction, I believe the fanbase would revolt if the story ignored its most important character. But by including a Shepherd, choices would then be canonized. Or not. A skillful showrunner could claim that this is just one possibility, and it doesn't carry any more weight than the millions of playthroughs conducted by gamers worldwide. I would never have supported a Mass Effect movie, but a TV show could work. A season a game, potentially splitting the 3rd game into 2 seasons given its glut of content. Bringing on Jim Henson would be a no-brainer considering their work on Farscape. Rex wouldn't be much more complicated than Earl Sneed Sinclair. Asari and Turians would involve prosthetics. Hell, all the other aliens never appear to move, so practical effects could be employed. Quarians just require the suitable stand-in model and camera angles that, for the majority, focus on their upper torsos, only requiring digital work in other situations. Solarians, they may be a bit tricky. Actor selection may appear obvious, as so many roles were modeled on real people and some were voiced by TV and film actors. However, if you were to do that, and I think many fans would welcome it, it would skew the assumed ages of most of the characters. How old do you think Shephard is? I've seen numerous videos presenting him as old, and it doesn't help that Mark Meer is no spring chicken. Yvonne Strahovski is 39, and supposedly at the end of Mass Effect 3, she's indicated as being 36. That's pretty close. Diana Allers is literally based on an actual person's face and voice. Anderson and Hackett are both recognizable, but also way older than their characters. Ashley's look was based on actress Erica Serra, which you might have seen in the sci-fi show Eureka. She's 42, and a really good 42. Caden is voiced by Raphael Sabarge, who's 58, and I think we can assume he won't be carried over, though I guess he could play Caden's father. As for Shephard, what was your guess? You're all wrong. He's supposed to be 28 at the beginning of Mass Effect 1. Yeah, despite attempts to render all of Shephard's non-canonical, one thing that was set was his age. And yes, I've been assuming a male Shephard throughout all of this. The chances of a femme Shep as the show's lead is honestly 0, despite the numerous benefits, so let's move on. But I find it weird. They canonized his age. But 28? I've asked around, and no one believes it. He doesn't act 28, he doesn't sound 28, and most of the time he doesn't look it. I mean, Jack is 25, that I buy. As for Tally's official age, I never agreed with it. It claims she's 22 in Mass Effect 1, but her voice and mannerisms, and even her dialogue, points to her being at the most 19. When someone claims to be going through a rite of maturity, the implied age is around 18, ignoring recent evidence that actual brain chemistry points to maturity ending around 25, which I can personally attest to. So I always thought she was younger, leading to a marked maturity 2 years later in Mass Effect 2. I know this does create potentially a bit of a problem with me claiming Shephard is older and Tali younger, but if you pursue a romance, their relationship dynamic actually points to that. I mean, it's not severe. This isn't a May-December romance. I had one person claim Shephard was 50, which I think is too high. My guess was mid-30s, and since so many people romance Liara, considering she's 106 in ME1, obviously age is not a factor in the future, so personally, I would make Shephard older. It makes sense in almost every degree. Wow, that was a tangent. Where was I? Joker is supposedly 30, which points even more to Shephard being older. Seth Green is 48, but honestly, he doesn't look it, so I think no one would complain if he were to be put in the chair. Aliens could be voiced by their original actors for obvious reasons, so Garrus, Tally, Morden, and Rex are all covered. Also, despite not having a canonical first name, there is the default name John, meaning yes, that's his first name in any canonical story. Continuing the speculative exercise, I'd start the first season with a quick prologue introducing mankind's discovery of the Prothean archives on Mars, and the subsequent revelation of the sole Mass Effect relay that is literally the dwarf planet Charon. Then there would be a 35-year time jump, and just saying, if Shephard was 35, it would be an interesting coincidence that he was born at the dawn of mankind's push into an interstellar civilization. We don't shift to the Normandy, but with a Kuz and that fated mission where Shephard loses his entire unit. Why the sole survivor background? It's a narrative choice. It creates a moment from Shephard's past he is still coming to terms with, especially when Shephard awakens from a dream of said encounter. As for employing the spacer path, there is a justification for this. Someone Earthborn, I believe, would be overly skewed to sympathize with humans and hang around humans, except outside of Kaidan, Ashley, and Joker, Shephard rarely associates with them. Miranda, Jacob, and Vega are forced on his team, but the rest, all aliens, are brought on by choice. I imagine a Shephard who lived exclusively in space would not feel as much of an emotional connection with Earth. I like the idea of him being born in space and bouncing from ship to station, each time pushing further and further from Earth. Imagine the first time Shephard ever stepping on Earth occurring at the beginning of Mass Effect 3. It creates a unique character arc, as Shephard has always been used to living in space and working alongside non-humans. Plus, it creates a common ground for a conversation you would have later. Spoilers. This path also creates more of a justification as to why the Council would elect Shephard as a Spectre. He doesn't exhibit an overt bias towards Earth. He could become a Spectre and think of the galactic community first over the small ratio of his own species. Plotting out the adaptation would be interesting given that Mass Effect 1 has few critical story points. Assuming each is an episode, you only have Eden Prime, the Citadel, Noveria, Pharos, Virmire, and Ilos. Assuming a 10-episode streaming show, what would you fill the rest with? Well, the first thing to assume is that Shephard would not be present for every second of the show. Captain Picard receives top billing on TNG, but how many episodes feature him as a center point? He barely makes a cameo in some situations as we focus on others. This will become the key to adapting Mass Effect 2. Yes, this speculation on plotting a potential non-existent TV show is rooted in my discussion regarding a canon story. Because, obviously, recruiting Garrus, Tally, and Rex is the canonical story despite the option to keep them away. I can't imagine anyone ever disagreeing with that. We have a consensus. Liara would be rescued in haste, resulting in the emotional exchange on Noveria. Having Liara present for her mother is also assumed canonical. The Rachni Queen, saved. The Pharos colonies, rescued. These decisions coincide with both gamer consensus and game writers. This brings us to Virmire. As discussed, Rex would survive, as much a canonical decision as one could make. But the fate of Ashley and Kaidan is a bit more challenging to parse. For one, the divide isn't skewed to one decision. 60-40 creates a debate, and apparently this nearly even split is a recent development. One would assume that if Shephard romanced Ashley, she would survive, except as we will soon discover, not many players selected Ashley as a romantic interest. And while there is the sexist preference with the Virmire choice, I think an argument can be made to upset expectations. For one, to be honest, Ashley is not a very well-written character. I find Kaidan has a better story arc, and it was on my recent Legendary playthrough that I discovered the strengths of that character. Some circles refer to Ashley as the space racist, with articles being written advocating the strength of Kaidan. But ignore that. As you can clearly see where I'm going, I think Kaidan should survive Virmire. The event involves Shepard's crew meeting up with a group of Solarians led by Captain Kara, this guy. Despite initial preferences, Kaidan is usually the first to volunteer. The additional justification is that Solarians rarely have biotics, so teaming the biotic Kaidan with them makes sense. Technically, anyone can arm the nuke. This places the characters in their position, and when the choice comes, Shephard chooses Kaidan. To render this choice even more traumatic and reveal Shephard's torn motivations between mission and loyalty, maybe perhaps he and Ashley had been flirting. Nothing serious, but enough to reveal a budding attraction. This creates considerable regret in both him and Caden, a decision that resonates throughout the trilogy. This isn't entirely circumstantial, but I found Caden more regretful, more distressed over the events than Ashley, if she survives. Caden suffers significantly from survivor's guilt, a conversation that repeats even into Mass Effect 3. That's considerably better storytelling. As for Shepard's ultimate justification, he kind of glosses over his choice, pinning Ashley's fate with Saren.
It wasn't your call, Alenko. I had to choose. I chose you.
But if I'd done my job, you wouldn't have had to make that call.
It wasn't your fault. It wasn't my fault. The only one to blame here is Saren.
But I feel there should be greater ownership over his choice, creating a speech he would give to Caden later. It may go something like this. It was a combat decision, Caden. I had to ignore personal influences, as that disrespects both the mission and this uniform. Saving you saved a dozen Solarians, including Captain Crye. It came down to math. You don't have to like it. You shouldn't, because I don't. At the end of the day, Saren didn't kill Ashley. I did. Most of the rest of the first season follows as expected. The reveal of the Reapers, the push to Ilos, and the attack on the Citadel. As the Destiny Ascension is honestly a fantastic ship, I'd save the Council, and it would go a long way to reveal Shepard's character. He is military, meaning he can sometimes be asked to put his life on the line. But the Council are civilians, and a soldier's duty is to protect them. Honestly, this decision is easy, and considering not much changes regardless of this decision, let's just go with it. As for the Council recommendation, as we'll unlikely be diving into Anderson's reasoning for leaving, it may make more sense to have him recommended, but ultimately turn down the offer. You need a diplomat in that role, and Captain Anderson would rather be better behind the curtain. But honestly, as this decision doesn't really matter, it would be another coin flip. The only difference in the story structure is an obvious one. I mentioned earlier that Shepard cannot be the sole center of attention. We established what truly makes Shepard unique is his capacity to attract a diverse group of people as friends. Friends that will die to protect one another. So it feels weird that every moment should include him. The only notable aspect of the game that seriously cannot carry over is the basic structure of the game. Okay, side rant. I once went on a tirade about the difference between game story, book story, and film story. They are not intrinsically compatible. Thus, the definition of adaptation is mandatory when shifting a narrative from one format to another. Books often linger on ideas too long and feature too many characters, but they can also become more relatable to real life, as that's how life is. Games have to accommodate the mechanics and the compromises made for interactivity. The first step in adapting a game is to remove everything that could be considered an artifact of the game. And if there's anything left over, make that the story. You certainly don't want to adapt the game itself, which is why the Doom movie sucks. This is one of the reasons why when you remove the game from old titles that were adapted like Double Dragon, what remained was horrible. There was nothing really original and exciting left over. Story in a game is like story in a porn movie. It's expected to be there, but it's not that important. That was John Carmack, a very famous quote, which is why you should never adapt any games he makes. Even the latest Doom game actively and amusingly mocks the idea of a story, tossing it literally aside in exchange for the game. This is why I was amazed the Sonic movie actually worked. They removed the game and somehow made something interesting with what remained. Little that there was. It's why they adapted Detective Pikachu and not the primary Pokemon game. Warcraft suffered from the same problem as an adaptation of Destiny would, where it possessed an overabundance of lore but not an actual story. Even the good ones aren't very good. Arcane was a shot in the arm showing how to do it. They stripped the entire game out, every aspect, leaving what remained. A world and, thankfully, attractive characters, and they forged a story from that. I'm amazed they pulled that off. So what aspects of Mass Effect are considered game story? The majority of the pointless side quests are wandering in the Mako, the ambling around the Citadel. Why doesn't Shepard not have a chair on the Normandy? Like, outside of his private quarters, where does he sit? Like, there's no captain's chair. What else? Well, not every situation needs to be resolved with a protracted gunfight with convenient chest-high walls. Barriers? Yeah, I think we can leave barriers in. I mean, if it's good enough for Dune, it's good enough for Mass Effect. Shephard cannot be someone that answers every problem out of the barrel of a gun. Not every conversation will involve characters standing in one place and chatting relentlessly about their lives. I imagine a moment, thanks to Shephard's spacer background, that he is multi-talented, able to understand aspects of the universe not programmed into him via the military. Maybe in his upbringing he learned about machines from the engineers he lived alongside. This could create a situation where Shephard and Tali solve an engineering crisis. Shephard might have encountered alien artifacts before, even as a child, allowing a personal connection to other characters like Liara. And obviously, Shephard's away team doesn't always have to be limited to 3 people. Yes, I know Star Trek defined the 3-man away mission, adding expendables to fill out the ranks, but when they needed Geordi, they expanded to 4. Crusher expanded them to 5. Kirk led away missions, so we can get away with Shephard getting his hands dirty. Sir, is you personally leading a risky away mission really in everyone's best interest? Maybe I should take this one. Albeit for me to quote the adage, don't ask someone to do something you're not willing to do yourself, but in this situation, you're Alliance Navy. Technically, you can't enforce jurisdiction. I'm the Spectre, the one with the big stick. I'm expected to handle situations personally. I mean, the capacity of the Kodiak shuttle is supposedly 14, meaning the entire cast could technically accompany Shephard, but ignoring that, I'd put it at least at 5 or more. And in most situations, especially combat-heavy missions, it would be generally always all hands on deck. It also creates situations where perhaps Shephard handles one mission while a handful of others deal with another. Crazy, right? It may also create a situation where viewers may notice a pattern with who Shephard selects, maybe even a nod to the popular choices made in the game. I know, I haven't talked about the elephant in the room, the one thing BioWare won't discuss. Relationships. Third-party surveys are satiated with this stuff. I have a bit of a background in statistics, and there's some interesting points a lot of people are missing. Shephard has about a dozen potential romantic interests, which increases if you include casual relationships that don't really go anywhere. For obvious reasons, gamers are more skewed towards earlier characters than later ones. I'll be referring to this file a lot, given it has over 5,000 entries, a significant sample size to pull from. The bias comes from one issue. Between all these characters, only one can be romanced by both gendered Shephards. Liara. I know you'll say Kelly, Samara, and technically, I guess, Morinth also counts, but they literally go nowhere. And Caden is revealed to be fluid in Mass Effect 3, but this was a later development, which honestly won't skew these numbers much. 70% of gamers play Broshep, 30% for Femshep, and this entire group can vote for Liara. However, the sample size drops when voting for anyone else, but many surveys don't account for this. Here's the graph for ME1's romance, and a large percentage, nearly 50%, selected Liara. This would indicate that Liara is the preference for the majority, right? The first clue of a flaw in this logic is that 20% elected no one. This was 7 years ago, so it doesn't consider legendary choices, but even considering singular all-encompassing playthroughs, I find this 20% quite telling. I don't believe this means 20% preferred to romance no one throughout the entire trilogy as much as gamers are replaying the game and holding back with the intent of selecting someone later. So let's move on to Mass Effect 2. I won't show that graph just yet, except that I'd like to look at the friends. The friends? Well, yes, only 2 companions from ME1 carry over to be companions in ME2, Tali and Garrus. The rest barely show up. And many dedicated gamers played through ME2 before the release of Lyra the Shadow Broker, which is subsequently often played after the events of ME2. This indicates that for all intents and purposes, whoever we romanced at ME1 offers us the cold shoulder throughout ME2, almost like the game is giving players a pass to romance someone else. Not commenting on motivations, but only 25% remain loyal to Liara. But let's break this down, shall we? From 5,700 votes, 24.6% elected Liara and 10.5% for Garrus. The problem is that technically Garrus is only an option for Femshep. Only 30% of the vote really matters. See where this is going? Garrus has 596 votes, and assuming a range of error of around, let's say, 30, given the number of people who voted changes on each of these graphs, the actual percentage of Femshep players that selected Garrus is 34.5%. Now, admittedly, we don't know the 25% choice of Liara breaks up between broship and femship, but given it's lower than Garrus' ratio, it actually doesn't matter, as breaking these values would actually skew more in favor of Garrus. When you look around the internet and read comments and watch videos, a shocking number of people assume Liara is the canonical choice for romance, that she is the one meant for Shephard. Despite never seeing evidence of BioWare enforcing this, many Liara fans like using that as justification, and some evidence points to a bias on behalf of the developers. Using her as a center point of Lara the Shadow Broker, for example. Her earlier inclusion in Mass Effect 3 is another one, but despite this, the question remains. If she's the one BioWare appears to push on fans, why do fewer people select her than we think? Before answering that, let's look at another companion, Tali. This one is even worse, 23.2%. Once again, we have to alter this sample size to accommodate. 70% of broships reduces the potential sample, and when calculating numbers, despite Tali being selected 23% of the time among actual broships, Tali is selected 42% of the time. Given the number of potential interests, this is a considerable value. Once you remove the femship votes for Liara, the ratio would surely drop to nearly half of Tali's majority. And alas, every survey I can find forgets about this bias. After that, the remaining love interests don't fare well at all. Next up is Miranda, who's 20.5%, would also technically put her over Liara once the sample sizes are adjusted. Jack is a mere 4.2% before adjustment, conflicting with a bizarre pattern in professional journalism that appears to think Jack is the best of them all. I mean, both Gamerant and Den of Geek both selected Jack as their all-time favorite, but the numbers just don't match what fans prefer. This admittedly flawed survey only takes in about 500 votes, but it doesn't list any femship choices, meaning if you played as the feminine shepherd, the only person you could choose is Liara. But despite that, Tali is still higher. This utterly unscientific poll of 6,700 votes puts Tali at the majority at 36%. So we can deduce that despite Liara being assumed the canonical choice, she isn't the preferred choice by a majority of fans. The big question is why? Well, firstly, if you look back at ME1, Liara is, sorry to say, somewhat poorly written.
What could I say, Mother? That you're insane? Evil? Should I explain how to kill you? What could I say?
I mean, Ali Hillis is doing the best she can given the material, but Liara was always portrayed a little awkwardly and not in the way the writers intended. The 2-year time jump indicated in ME2 creates situations where nearly everyone grows up, Liara included. In fact, I would say Liara is more believable as a 106-year-old character after ME1 than during it. Despite how old that number translates in human years, I always felt someone her age should reflect that world weariness and apprehension, a slightly detached persona, which Liara exudes throughout the rest of the series. Liara comes off as guarded and stoic, and while I consider this an improvement, by then many broships had already moved on. I looked for compilation videos showing an entire romance, every line ever spoken regardless of context. This video clocks total conversion time with Liara at nearly 5 hours. Let's round up. You may be surprised to know that the romantic conversations regarding Liara began at about 25 minutes. That's 25 minutes of talking to Liara before romantic conversations begin. The bizarre and painful flirting occurs even sooner. Even to me, that feels rushed. And given the acceleration of ME1's story, saving the galaxy and the stresses involved, it's honestly surprising that Shephard romances anyone in the first game. When Liara re-enters ME2, it's fleeting. Now let's look at Tali. I found a similar supercut video and I was shocked to find it at 8 hours. This is not a proper comparison as it may not account for all the clips, but with Tali, the option to romance her doesn't occur until midway through the second game. This shows normal humans being surveyed regarding where they meet their loved ones. It surprised literally no one that the #1 foundation of romance is friendship. 39% of people found love that way. Work is 15%, which I happen to fall into. In the first game, allowing Tali and Garrus to become friends, like all the other non-romanceable companions, allowed authentic, genuine emotions to form. They were not forced like Liara. It's no wonder why Garrus and Tali have such fanatical fan bases. In this video, the romance with Tali begins 2 hours and 40 minutes in. This ignores the 2-year time jump as well. And just to push this point further, the Tali romance feels more authentic, and there's considerably more passion involved. I once made a passing comment that Tali loves Shephard more than Liara loves Shephard in their respective romances. And why not? Shephard saves both Liara and Tali in their first encounters, but Shephard later offers Tali the means to fulfill her pilgrimage. Later, Shephard not only accompanies Tali to investigate her father's crimes, but, and let's be honest, if you romance her, you did it this way. When it comes to her trial, you follow her wishes to keep her father's honor safe. And despite that, you still convince the council to exonerate her. Does Shephard do any more? Oh, not much. He just single-handedly liberates the Quarian homeworld that had been denied to Tali's people for 400 years. I mean, who wouldn't fall in love with this guy? He grabs a laser targeting system and stands against a Reaper to save his girlfriend's planet. Tali's admission of love hits harder than anyone else's.
You worry too much.
I love you.
Keep us alive.
During the extended cut, I mentioned this scene and how it felt a little forced, but it did give Shephard the opportunity for a final moment with potentially their love interest. Because despite your love for your companion, you always put them in harm's way? That's kind of weird, right? I always assumed your love interest would have brought that up, at least once. I would have thought you would shelter me, keep me away from anything dangerous. Firstly, confining you to the ship is disrespectful. Secondly, you're one of the foremost experts in your field, someone whose absence is noted when not around. My success on a mission, my survivability, is entirely based on the team I form, and I have a better chance of coming back alive with you than without. When you're with me, we come back alive. I'm not one for luck, but I tend to hedge my bets. Or, something like that. Where was I? Right. In the extended cut DLC, there are about 5 minutes of dialogue for this 20-second scene, and some of them are quite emotional. Let's look at Liara's.
You gotta get out of here.
I'm all right, Shephard.
Don't argue with me, Liara.
You're not leaving me behind.
No matter what happens. You mean everything to me, Liara. You always will.
Shephard, I am yours.
That's not bad. Let's look at Tali's.
You gotta get out of here.
I can't stay behind.
Don't argue with me, Tali.
Don't leave me behind.
I need you to make it out of here alive, Tali. Get back to Rannick. Build yourself a home.
I have a home. Come back to me.
Holy crap, I still have issues getting through this scene. Also, by the way, not too long ago, YouTube implemented a system where you can see where most people move the timeline to, what most people watch and rewatch. Look at Liara's peak, then look at Tali's. To conclude this shockingly contentious topic, I don't understand the need for pro-Liara gamers to insist that she is the canonical choice. No one else bothers to make such a declarative statement, but I could not find a single post, thread, or video that brought up romance in Mass Effect without at least one person declaring that Liara is the canonical romantic interest. Whenever I find these, I often call the writer out asking for evidence, a link, a Twitter post, anything. No one has ever been able to supply one. Many admit that BioWare has never stated who the canonical choice is, if there is actually one, but still insist on it regardless. Their reasoning? 1, she is the only romantic option that cannot die. 2, she is the only romantic option available to both male and female Shepherd in all 3 games. 3, she is the only companion with her own DLC. 4, she is the only romantic option with a key plot element in Mass Effect 3. She is the only romantic option to cameo in Mass Effect Andromeda as Point 5. And finally, 6, she is the only romantic option confirmed to appear in the next Mass Effect, which we will talk about. This is all conjecture. 1, this is entirely relating to how the story was written and does in no way point directly to her being a romantic option. 2, she is a dual option because of the nature of the species, and later this is proven incorrect given the existence of Samara and the bisexual Caden. 3, the Liara the Shadow Broker DLC is part of Mass Effect 2, which never offered Liara as a recruitable companion, meaning if you add in all the dialogue and side missions for alternative romantic options, especially Garrison Tali, it evens out. Liara was excised for DLC. By that logic, Javik would also be canon. 4, this plot element exists with or without romance, and this disregards the 4 missions Tali gets. 5, once again, this points her to being an important character. I'll admit that, but important does not equate romantic canon. And 6, as we'll soon see, Liara's involvement is a matter, once again, of her species, being the only ones, save the Krogan, that can live a very long time. Liara is critically important to the story of Mass Effect, absolutely. So is Anderson, and Hackett. But there appears to be some compulsion by fans of Liara to insist that she be canon. I see the same problem with Dragon Age. Morrigan is critically important as a character, one of the few that shows up in later volumes, specifically Dragon Age Inquisition. And in that game, if you romanced her in the first title, there is unique dialogue reserved for this one condition. And if you can believe it, there are those that insist Morrigan is the canon option as well, despite the fact that it's stated nowhere. Even the writers who penned the novels have stated the lack of true canon. The nature of a novel means it must establish its own canon, and the novel's canon has no relation to the game's canon, such as it is. If you wish, think of the novel as an alternative universe where things took a specific path with regards to Wynne and other events. How these events would have played out in the world of your personal game might have been very different. I'm not, however, telling that particular story. Here's a much more recent survey, one I found as I was editing this video. It polls fewer people, but let's take a look. Most of the answers match the graphs we've already seen, with a few notable variations. Shepard's gender is more even now than ever before. Notoriety is also more even between Soul Survivor and War Hero. Shepard's background is nearly a three-way tie. Paragon was the majority, which we all knew, and Soldier was the majority. Selected class, though second, is only a few votes away. But I bring this up because of this graph, one of the only that accounts for gender. In total, Liara is the clear majority, but when you split it between male and femshep, we see that growing population elected to romance no one. This ratio is increasing as these surveys move closer to the present. Like I said, the other pies are predictable, though the Vermeer Survivor is now the most even it has ever been. Skipping past these consistently Paragon pies, we get the romance in ME2, and we see that only 14 to 15% of each gender remain faithful to Liara, while a large volume of other players spread themselves among the rest, with, expected, Tali and Garrus taking up the brunt. After a sequence of entirely consistent choices, we reach the Mass Effect 3 choice, and this pie is, well, it's a mess. More than 30% elected Liara, but 17 for males, 16 for females. As we are dealing with an even divide, we can eliminate the bias and have a consistent number for Liara, Tali, and Garrus. Among femsheps, Liara is selected 38% of the time, with Garrus literally tied at also 38%. Among male sheps, Liara is selected 29% of the time, with Tali selected 35% of the time. Liara is important, no doubt, but to declare she is the canonical romantic choice is honestly short-sighted and not reflective of player consensus. By the way, if I'm going to show graphs and quote surveys like scripture, I must admit my own biases regarding the collated information. As I pick Tali as a romantic option in my playthrough, I can be accused of data mining to prove my point. And that has some credence, but in the end I think we can all conclude, which is ultimately my point, that assuming a canonical love interest is highly debatable. Returning to our TV show, what romantic option would we select? We have to pick one, obviously. Obviously. We already stated that this need not enforce canon, like the previous quote. It need only serve the story of this particular universe. And all of this is in regards to our theoretical TV show. But on this topic, well, there is another option. Remember, I said there were gaps in the first season adapting the first game. We've also established Shepard has a living family. He has a living mother and maybe even a twin sister. Yes, I had this idea for a while and was pleasantly surprised to find numerous other people suggesting it. Appease the 30% of gamers by introducing FemShep as Jane Shepard. Wait, your twin sister's named Jane? Yes. John and Jane? Yes. Seriously, your parents named you two John and Jane. They're military, they didn't have much of an imagination. Jane can offer an alternative view. She can be slightly more renegade, more loyal to humanity, which makes it an interesting point where Broshep is forced to work for Cerberus, and his twin sister might have volunteered. However, this recurring not main character can provide some needed balance if broship comes off too nice. This concludes the first speculative season of Mass Effect. Season 2, adapted from Mass Effect 2, is plagued with issues. Despite being the best game in the series and one of the best games of all time, it is heavily saturated with game stories. ME2 spends most of its running time with busy work and loyalty missions. Like Mass Effect 1, there's a limited number of actual critical story missions. Horizon, Collectorship, The Key, and the final push through the Omega-4 relay. You can't spend the rest assembling a team of eccentric characters, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Normandy goes boom, Shephard dies, but instead of an immediate time jump of 2 years, we remain with the rest of the crew to deal with the after effects and the ultimate quest of Liara and others to recover Shepard's body. Before we dive into it, I feel it's important to divorce this series from what was established in comics and books, and you'll find out why soon. Liara's story on finding Shepard's body has already been established in comics, but in this situation I think the quest should involve several known characters, namely Jane, Liara, and potentially Tali. Obviously, initially the desire is to stop the Shadow Broker from selling Shepard's body to the collectors. The initial motivation is to respect his remains and ensure a proper burial. However, throughout the story, Cerberus offers another option that Jane and Liara disagree with to such an extent that Liara hands Shepard over on her own. This offers the opportunity to finally develop that potential relationship with Liara and FemShep. The point is that we wouldn't return to Shepard until potentially episode 3. I also like the idea of Cerberus initially wanting to populate the Normandy with familiar faces but limiting that to only human ones. And it's Shepard that ultimately finds the crew after a lifetime of contacts before the start of Mass Effect 1. I feel this is important as it creates an environment where Shepard is already rebelling and forming a team on his own terms and not someone else's. He discovers Archangel and knows well ahead that it's Garrus. Garrus knows Mordin. Liara recommends Samara. Miranda accidentally reveals the truth about Jack, and Shepard takes the initiative. This brings us to an ultimate decision. Do we keep everyone? I think, honestly, there are some characters we can do without. Assuming practical effects, it would be easier to keep Rex as a returning crew member and not introduce Grunt, a popular character that barely makes a splash after ME2. And while I would include Zaid, I wouldn't include Kazumi for reasons to be revealed later. Samara, Jack, and Mordin would be obvious. Thane could undoubtedly be involved, but if push comes to shove, honestly, we might be able to handle the story without him. The reasoning behind all of this involves later in the season where we handle the majority of the loyalty missions basically all at once. Shepard constantly doing busy work for crew members when a crisis is at hand doesn't really work, so returning to what I said earlier about him not always being the center of attention, he'll give the order for everyone to have one final break before finally moving for the Omega-4 relay. This is before the Collector attack on the Normandy. I imagine this would be prompted by Tali's request to leave the ship, to see her court case, and Shepard deciding to accompany her. He then prompts everyone to settle their affairs as the end day closes in. We wouldn't handle everyone's stories. I think Thane and Garrus could handle their stories simultaneously, with both coming to terms with their past. I can't think of anyone better to talk Garrus out of assassination than another assassin. Miranda's sister is a vital side plot, which would involve her teaming up with, of course, Jack and Jacob, because why not? Miranda and Jack dislike each other, but as Miranda's going against Cerberus kind of with her mission, there's no one else she would trust to ensure the mission's success. Tali and Shepard would leave for the flotilla on their own, and, well, we know what happens then. Legion? Of course, Legion would be involved. Lair of the Shadow Broker would take place within these events as well. Depending on the time, we might be able to make room for Overlord, but honestly, we could ignore it and not affect the course of history. And yes, I'd show Tali's face at the end of this season. When it comes to the ultimate suicide mission, while it's entirely possible that everyone can survive in the game, I think it would be cheap to advertise it as a suicide mission in this speculative TV show and then have no one die. So despite how well players do, I think it's essential that not everyone make it out of the collector ship. But who? Who doesn't make it out? I know you think it has to be Jacob, but it's probably not a great idea. Plus, I think everyone would be expecting it. Rather than knowing who would be important plot threads in Mass Effect 3, I think while the crew is of course rescued, I think Zaid should die escorting the survivors back. You know, maybe Grunt will make it out of this. And despite his popularity, I think Thane should go as well. And, well, whoever protects the group with a biotic shield. In this case, I think Samara. She's older and lived a long life. The ending? Well, okay. The boss fight is interesting, but are we seriously going to end the second season with the crew fighting a giant Terminator? Honestly, this has always come off as goofy. Regardless, as it's evident that the fate of the collector base doesn't matter, there shouldn't even be a choice given. Then it wouldn't bite us in the ass as badly come ME3. So looking at the aspects of canonical storytelling, we can assume that officially every crew member is recruited, every loyalty mission handled, and everyone survives the end. I mean, why not? Each loyalty mission involves a critical choice. While not crucial to its impact in the grand story, they affect the specific characters involved. For many, this is once again a toss of a coin, but general assumptions can be made, if assuming a majority Paragon Shephard. Jacob doesn't execute his father, Miranda is reunited with her sister, Jack destroys her old laboratory, sparing Aresh, you save Malin's data, as everyone does, Grunt joins Clan Erdnot, Garrus doesn't execute Sidonis, and obviously you don't choose Morinth over Samara. I mean, seriously. Tali is exonerated without revealing the evils of her father. Kolyad is stopped. To rewrite or not rewrite the heretics is a bit trickier. Returning to these pie graphs, we see that 99% let Gret out and 99% activated Legion. Clearly, both options are canon. Samara is chosen 96% of the time, while Malin's data is saved 86%. Tali is exonerated 92% of the time. The heretics are rewritten 79%, which would clearly indicate a majority, though we know that will bite us in the ass come Mass Effect 3. But looking at the pie, it's safe to say this is canon as well. Mass Effect 3 is, interestingly enough, one of the densest narratively. Tachanka, Rannoch, these are all stories that could be carried out as depicted. When fewer characters are carried over from the previous season, we can streamline the story to focus specifically on who survives. However, certain issues may expand the third game into 2 seasons. For one, I would start the season with the Arrival DLC, not the start of the third game, so we immediately become aware of why Shephard becomes unpopular. He is then forced to disband his crew and face the Alliance military on Earth. How ironic that he would finally get to see Earth under arrest. The reveal of the Crucible should be done a bit more organically. It could even be teased as early as Season 1. The team reassembles as Shephard and others rally the galaxy together. The genophage is cured, Mordin sacrifices himself, and the Geth and Quarians unite with Legion's death. The very structure of Mass Effect points to what I said, wow, 8,125 words ago, that regarding triage. If gamers assumed every choice held equal weight and each option and choice is fully realized, ME3 would have been colossal. And the very structure of the game points to the designers endorsing some ideas while disregarding others. For example, Miranda is one of the most popular romance options in the second game. For some reason. I never could understand that. I mean, Jack I could actually understand despite not entirely agreeing. It makes sense with a renegade ship, but Paragon? Yet no matter how you act, Jack still refers to you in the third game as a Boy Scout, almost as if Paragon was assumed. But if Miranda and Jack were popular as they were, why did they only appear in single mission episodes in the game? If you elected to romance anyone other than Garrus, Tali, Liara, or the Vermeer survivor throughout the Mass Effect series, you got shafted come the end. Despite how unpopular the Vermeer survivor is, they get more attention in the final game than supposedly 2 more popular love interests. It's almost as if BioWare knew something that we did not. Eventually, close attachments would form between characters, and despite their popularity, time forged longer, stronger relationships. Come the finale on Earth, Shephard gets a final conversation with every character, allowing Miranda and Jack to give a final goodbye if potential love interests. However, they're limited to a single holographic broadcast and then are denied that cathartic moment as part of the extended DLC. And Jacob? Well, if you were part of the 0.4% of people that elected to romance him, Boy, you would soon regret that, as Jacob leaves you for someone else. Burn. I actually had problems even selecting this option. Jacob is that unpopular. This is why the designers opted for triage to reduce less popular characters in exchange for the ones players enjoyed the most. It's no shock why Garrus and Tally are so popular. They are the only two selectable campaigns for the entire series. It becomes a real family regardless of who you romance. This tight bond formed with these two, Liara, Rex, and the Vermeer survivor. Despite how many people get invited to the party, there will always be this core group of characters that survive from the beginning. And yes, that can be assumed to be canon. Returning to our thought experiment, I would follow the course of the game rather faithfully, with a minor caveat. It's implied that when the Reapers invade, they decimate a world and do it rather quickly. This puts pressure on Shephard, which he honestly somewhat ignores for the course of the story. An element needs to be put in place with urgency, but not as much of a clock ticking. I never understood why Shephard would bother himself with busy work and minor side quests when Earth is being obliterated in real time. I honestly don't know how to solve this without altering the story of Mass Effect 3. One solution would be to only have 1 or 2 Reapers land. The other real solution is that Earth is not invaded at the story's onset, but relatively near the end when the Citadel moves. But the invasion still occurs, probably starting with nameless outer colonies and then moving inward, creating pressure but not a constant compulsion. With a slightly more leisurely pace, it would then make sense to end the season with the Citadel DLC, the last moment of calm before the final push in the final season. The Citadel DLC is honestly an aberration. While other side content is less important, its subplot and character interactions are critical, despite Citadel not impacting the grandiose story. It also points to what Mass Effect could have done if the designers had another year to build the game. Variety encroaches on every moment. A single 10-second scene could have dozens of alternate dialogue options, which some players have spent dozens of hours trying to collate. I am shocked by how much work was put into the DLC, and by the fans later to collect all these clips. It creates subplots that only exist within the confines of this DLC, relationships that do not extend outside the realm of Shephard's honestly luxurious apartment. And it points to the massive popularity of Rex as he becomes a selectable companion again for the first time since the first game. There are substantial conversation points that occur only if he is there. And finally, each and every romantic interest gets its own unique payout. And finally, Liara gets a good scene. Referring back to canon, we can safely assume that the Vermeer survivors are not assassinated in the Cerberus attack. Udina's coup fails, Javik is rescued. In all, I find the Mass Effect 3 story relatively solid, at least until its last act. However, there are a few issues that I've always had problems with. In the second game, I commented that Shephard is sent off to hire people handed to him, and he doesn't recruit people organically like a good story would. Mass Effect 3 suffers from a similar issue. The revelation of the Crucible, a device capable of destroying Reapers, is suddenly introduced. Initially found in Prothean ruins that had been discovered on Mars a half-century earlier. Like, that's convenient. Wouldn't it have been better that Javik had plans with him, or better still, perhaps he only had a piece, and other pieces would have been found throughout the previous games/seasons. There's a piece on Eden Prime, there's a piece on Ilos. There are certain better ways to reveal this than having it dropped in front of everyone. I certainly like the idea that the plans of the Crucible had to be passed down between cycles and each galactic civilization added to it, perfected it, but was unable to be finished before annihilation. Now, with the pieces together, it can finally be made. Maybe the Prothean ruins contained a piece of the puzzle so no one could entirely understand until Shephard and his crew finally assembled it after 3 years of exploring and searching out for the secrets of the past. That's one workaround. But that does leave one big problem. It's often mentioned that no one is sure what the Crucible does, and I never really understood that. The very idea of building something you didn't understand baffles me. As stated before, this answer is handed to our character's expository style by the Prothean VI near the end of the game. Ask any engineer. You cannot build something without knowing what it is or what it does. This is dealt with in the film Contact, where they receive plans for a device, and initially they don't know what it is, a transport, a beacon, or even a bomb. However, it becomes evident before a single nail is hammered that it is, in fact, a transporter. The mystery is solved well before the device is built, because people are intelligent and can figure it out. And with dozens of alien species at work, you're telling me no one figured out what the Crucible does? It's revealed later that it's a bespoke power device that uses the Citadel as an antenna. The construction and operation of the Crucible must be known, otherwise how would they know how to operate it? And if someone looked at the plans, at the 4 arms that are designed to reach out, are you telling me no one figured out that these arms, when deployed, just happened to match the diameter of the Citadel, and no one thought that they connected to one another? And it gets worse. Even if we assume the Crucible is a mystery, its end result cannot be. Everyone believes it's a weapon to kill the Reapers. This is confirmed numerous times, but does no one ask how? A few people bring it up, but no one really gives it much thought. I mean, it can't be a Death Star. How would one single super laser be enough to wipe out thousands of Reaper ships before the weapon itself is destroyed? It had to be something that affected Reapers and nothing else. Otherwise, it would be a galaxy destroyer, something that would wipe out all life indiscriminately. Probably not that, hopefully. This leaves one final conclusion. It creates some type of pulse that specifically affects Reapers. But how does it distinguish them? Does it affect all technology? If it isolates Reapers, the only thing that they have that is different is their unique self-aware operating system, a pattern both EDI and the Geth emulate. Certainly the Geth, many of whom worked closely with the old machines, would know more. It can be safely assumed that the Crucible is a weapon that affects only Reapers and can do so across the galaxy. This brings up the point of delivery. And if no one brings up the Mass Effect relays as the answer, then we have truly lost hope in our intellectual elite. Once we reach this conclusion that the Crucible somehow mates with the Citadel and employs the Mass Effect relays to disseminate a single pulse that attacks Reaper code, then one more conclusion would be made. That other synthetic life like EDI and Geth may be susceptible. Oh yeah, I'm going there. But just not yet. The end of ME3 was rushed, leaving numerous questions unanswered. The Citadel shifts to Earth, and we don't know how. The fates of millions of people aboard the station are never explained. Shephard pushes towards the transport beam to be shoved off and eventually lectured by an annoying computer child who is less interested in a debate and more in creating a multiple-choice scenario with no good option. Leading up to this point, we are told our relative war assets matter, except for some reason they really don't. The entire game is about increasing a single value, and every conversation, every connection increases this. It aids in morale or adds an army. Krogan, Geth, Quarian. This is a war asset. So how does this number affect the choices the Catalyst offers you? How does this value in any way connect with the choices given? If your war asset is high enough, the synthesis ending is unlocked. Did we shoot it enough to unlock it? And if the values are really high and you subsequently pick the destroy ending, Shephard survives. But how does a cumulative war asset value affect one's personal survival? Know that regardless of your value, your attack on the Reapers doesn't change. You see the same cinematics with little variation. There's always just that one Reaper you see being blown apart. Regardless of how large your army is, it doesn't affect the actual battle. Does no one find that weird? Why can't you skillfully employ your war assets to secure critical components? Why can't an aggressive military penetrate the Reaper perimeter to secure the Citadel without a suicidal ground dash? I have numerous problems with this final act's logic before we even step close to that beam. There are problems that a theorized TV show would have to address. You can't have a show build up all of these assets and then ignore them all. You need to see Elcor living tanks and Krogan armies. Sure, the Destiny Ascension shows up, but we've already established that was a canonical situation anyway, established 2 games prior. Of course, a TV show doesn't need to create alternative ideas. It only needs to present one, thus assuming that the massive war asset value is represented in the final assault and that the final choices given to Shephard in the end are not affected by the size of the Allied army. But that leaves one final question. Which ending would you choose? At some point, I'll bring up the new Mass Effect, either called Mass Effect 4 or 5, depending on if you count Andromeda as 4. On that, by the way, I don't hate Andromeda. I enjoyed it. I was lucky enough to have gotten it post-patch. So I never found the bugs others did. It certainly has a much better ending than ME3, one that feels like a payoff. And personally, I found the PB romance way more interesting than Liara's. I would put her second to Tali. I mentioned Mass Effect's game consensus, but never went into Mass Effect Andromeda. I find it fascinating that the male-female split is practically even. And as expected, PB was overwhelmingly the most popular love interest. No shock there. Especially considering here total romance content is just under an hour, while Vetra is 39 minutes. Cora is 72 minutes. The Reporter and Avella are only 10 minutes each, so that wouldn't be very good. Most of the others are around 30 minutes, which means Cora and PB real outliers. Well, Jal is like 90 minutes, which is impressive. He and Vetra are also options for both genders. I think Costa doesn't get enough, well, love, to coin a phrase. But the lack of interest in these other relationships had me thinking. Do the writers think gamers are attracted to Garrus and Tali because they are exotic aliens? Like, are they assuming the leading attractive feature in Tali is her lack of a face? Or Garrus's, I don't know, frail? Originally, the writers expect, and rightly so, that most fans would migrate towards the exotic hot alien female. But if that was the case, why did so many abandon her the first chance the truly outlandish became an option? Clearly, there is a demographic that just wants to bone aliens, and the more peculiar the better. But suddenly we all migrated back to the traditional female and male models. PB isn't the best choice because she's a sorry. She's the best choice because she's the best choice. In the end, the deciding factor was, and brace yourself for this shocking revelation, the personality. Gamers fell in love with Garrus and Tali because we had hours with them without the pressure of a relationship. Drop a random Turian or whatever she is, and most players don't really care. It's why I would care less about the fate of Morrigan years after I wrapped that game. I also found it interesting that in many ways Andromeda features more mature storytelling with better defined characters, and Ryder makes more active choices as a leader rather than being pointed and responding like Shephard does in the original trilogy. And wow, did they put effort in these sex scenes. Makes Tali's fade to black a real slap in the face. Oh, about that. Someone went and made up a Tali sex scene. I mean, this took real effort. It's too bad few people ever finished Andromeda, as it has a satisfying conclusion. I would further claim that the first and last few hours are extraordinary. It's the, 50 hours of grinding in the middle I couldn't handle. My legendary playthrough, I did cut a few corners, but was finished in about 90 hours. My single playthrough of Andromeda, a single game, compared to the trilogy, took 60. Andromeda took longer to finish than Mass Effect 1 and 2 combined. I've never returned to it, and would not unless I could somehow reduce that clock. But the new Mass Effect has made many people assume that one of the 3 endings, I said 3, is canonical. And if you stuck with me this long, I'm here to tell you that is not exactly true. Like many times before, there have been numerous surveys regarding the ending. In this one, from 10,535 responses, we get this result. Despite assumptions that the synthesis would be the majority, unsurprisingly, despite the unavoidable deaths of Edie and the Geth, the destroy ending is the one preferred, the one with the fewest consequences, and the one Shephard is likely to pick. Obviously, we'll ignore the refuse ending, and the control is only chosen 11% of the time, despite technically being ethically cleaner than synthesis. And wait, mods? Mods? Yeah, some fans have been so upset about the events in Mass Effect 3, they have created original content to alter events in the game. There are some obvious ones, offering alternative uniforms or a semi-transparent helmet for Tali. But one of my favorites for existing, I've never tried it, is the Mass Effect Happy Ending mod. Now, I had contemplated my own variation of an ending before knowing of this one's existence, but I find it hilarious that people would go to this extent to create their own story regarding Shephard. And as you might have expected, Shephard survives, pulled out at the last second by faceless soldiers on a nameless Kodiak. Kind of anticlimactic, but whatever. And for the icing on this cake, the ending is altered where only Anderson's plate is placed, with Shephard alive. I find the existence of this mod fascinating, as it points to one of the biggest reasons why the destroy ending is selected, why so many people are upset about the series' resolution. Shephard dies. We are told and assume that we are Shephard. They are as much us as we are them. We don't want to die, especially given our romantic interest waits for our return. Why would BioWare take away our happy ending? Why would they be so cruel as to pull the rug from under us? Just a interposition, I occasionally hear from critics bemoaning about romance in video games. In nearly every situation, it's cliched, hasty, forced, and unrealistic. Some of them are downright painful. When I was younger, I looked forward to their inclusion, but as I became more seasoned as a writer, I started to see the flaws in how these romantic options were presented, often as trophies. The game didn't respect the romance, the characters, or the players. I used to look forward to them when options arose, but I found myself disappointed. Why? Because a baseline, a standard was set with the first Mass Effect, a romance that I admit now later was also hasty and forced. Often these love interests are simply exceptionally loyal hired hands. I can't get through the offerings in Fallout. Though framed within the MMORPG structure, Star Wars The Old Republic managed to pull off 1 or 2 semi-decent romances. That's 1 or 2 from like 16. It's vet, by the way. There are games where the romance is front and center, and some released from Japan have shown promise, though often with these, there's no organic development, little to no interactivity. Your choices are limited, your conversations predetermined, leaving players more spectators. We don't take ownership of our characters, so we have issues relating to that romance. Sure, there are other games offering more options, but quantity doesn't equate quality. I remember looking forward to Dragon Age Origins and found their gifting mechanic exceedingly half-baked, breaking immersion each time it's brought up. The only redeeming character was Morrigan, but that was because conversations with her carried double meaning. She would say one thing but mean another. She would yell at you, cast you out, only for your relationship value to improve. She was such a popular option. One of the last DLCs for the first game involved you hunting her down with a final option to leave with you to travel to other worlds. Mass Effect was different. The romantic options after ME1 were not about trophies or mechanical benefits during combat. Your love interest wasn't submissive or uncomplicated. The reason why ME2 and ME3 romances were so important, so well developed, and critically regarded by everyone was because the designers wrote the game in such a way as to make Shepard's romance part of the main story rather than a background subplot. BioWare struck oil, and I don't even think they were fully aware of how deep that well was. So when someone grumbles or laments about how badly written romantic plots are in video games, I would respond with, yes, they are poorly written, and often painful when present. And then there's Mass Effect. It's an exception so exquisite it made all others inferior. It's the outlier that proves the rule. But why? Why was Mass Effect so much better? Was it quality of writing? Sure. But I think it has something to do more, a secret sauce, if you will. BioWare didn't write romance. It didn't present romantic options. It created relationships. Some were passionate, others platonic. A balancing act few games have been able to replicate. Romantic plots in games are mostly all crap, because Mass Effect showed how it could be done. Returning from this digression, you can see why players were so invested in NPCs and our main character's survivability, so much so that I imagined this scenario. A fifth option. The Reapers are allowed to wipe out everyone, but Shepard and those he knows, the entire crew of the Normandy, are sent off to create a surviving colony to rebuild, like the ending of the 1973 battle for the Planet of the Apes. And no, I'm not that old. You could have created a scenario where the Ark Hyperion arriving in Andromeda actually contained the crew of the Normandy as well. Most of the Milky Way galaxy is defeated, but everyone you know survives. Would that have been better? I am honestly curious. Remember this moment from the film Interstellar?
We can care deeply, selflessly, about those we know, but that empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight.
This could not be more true, and certainly applies in this situation. The writers of Mass Effect might have assumed that players would think on a broad scale, selflessly, and pick the best option for the galaxy, when in truth most gamers could not look beyond their circle of loved ones. Most of us couldn't think past that line of sight. Maybe we would have preferred just us make it out. If you had to choose between a planet's population and the lives of everyone you knew, could you make what would be assumed to be the selfless choice, damning everyone you cared about to extinction to protect the 8 billion strangers you've never met? Like that box with a button that would kill a stranger if pressed, but reward you monetarily. The box would then be duplicated. Don't push it, and that box is destroyed. We are Shephard, and when presented with that situation, apparently 50% of us would kill the Geth and Edie just to get our happy ending. This mod, by the way, also retcons that. I mean, it's a happy ending after all. And the irony of all of this is the assumption that despite what the designers might have intended, nearly everyone has assumed that the Destroy ending is now canonical. I mean, there could be evidence given in this trailer. We already assumed that the Reject ending was a joke. Still, since Liara doesn't exhibit synthetic properties, we can assume that ending wasn't chosen, and since few people ever picked Control, Destroy would be the safe, final conclusion. Without commenting on this moral dilemma, I agree with many people that the actual choice itself is trite, manipulated, and in no way acceptable in a different medium. Likewise, the final events of the game create more confusing situations. If the Crucible's energy is unavoidable, where can anyone escape to? If the energy strikes the relays, no one will be able to use them. So where is this rendezvous point? It can't be outside the Sol system, as we see people rebuilding the Citadel. Likely the beam struck the relays before the fleets could use it to warp to another system, or not. This has always bothered me. Where is the fleet going, and how will they come back? The relays get disabled, so how could anyone travel anywhere? Where is the Normandy? Where did it crash? If an alien planet, how did it get there? Is this sequence of them pushing through hyperspace or them escaping under standard propulsion? If using a relay jump, that seems somewhat suicidal, considering once again the obvious conclusion that any weapon would have to employ the relays to disseminate the energy across the galaxy. Today, most people won't understand the anger so many fans had for the ME3 ending. They'll play the Legendary Edition and encounter a much better ending, oblivious to the fact that the original game just kind of ends. No resolution, no answers, just blip. Before moving on to my thoughts on this potential sequel, let's finish our thought experiment and end our TV series. The last season of Mass Effect would involve Thessia, Leviathan, Omega Horizon, the Cerberus Assault, and the final act. Unknown to viewers, conversations had occurred behind the scenes. We only see brief glimpses of them, the end of an argument, passing comments between Shephard and Legion and Edie. We assume, since the Crucible wasn't finished, the Reapers have no knowledge of what it could do. This leaves an assumption that even now the Crucible's design isn't finished, and only with the arrival of the Quarians and Geth does the final picture reveal itself. Behind the scenes, literally, our characters deduce that the Crucible would mate with the Citadel and employ the Mass Effect relays, and, assuming it would not wipe out all life in the galaxy, be able to just destroy the Reapers by attacking what makes them unique. And then they would deduce that such a weapon would potentially affect all synthetic life. By the way, remember this moment from the Citadel DLC?
Oh, it's just, well, one man's decorative glass wall fixture is another man's explosive glass wall fixture.
Oh, now you're in for it.
Explosive?
Microfilaments, Shephard. Tiny strips of explosives laid across the glass in a grid. It's your first line of defense. When an intruder enters, hit the switch and boom!
Wouldn't it have been priceless if there was an entirely new combat encounter where Shephard and company had to fight through the Citadel to get to the Crucible, and at one point Shephard cut through his own apartment and Reaper forces break in, only to get taken out in an explosion of broken glass? Honestly, given this would be the end of our theorized TV show, I think not all the characters survive. If Grunt makes it through ME2, I wouldn't give him his own standalone story, and he would die in this final act with the Earth Assault. And Caden is revealed to be bisexual, so I think this would be a great side plot for him and Steve Cortez, meaning neither of them would die, because that happens often enough to have become a trope. Depending on the conversation, Javik already admits that his life is over by the end of the game anyway, so having him die at the end would also make sense. That's 2. Need a third or maybe a fourth. Personally, it could include James because, well, James. And, okay, hear me out. I would consider killing Garrus. Wait, hear me out. In this timeline, Garrus is not romanced by any major character, and he's always a military guy, so I think a penultimate episode cliffhanger should involve his death, potentially on a suicide dash to fire the missiles that kills the Ground Reaper by the end. Then you would get a final after-death nod when the aquarium explodes in this aforementioned moment on the Citadel. We're alive, Shephard, thanks to your advice. Anderson left enough firepower to level a city block in his apartment. Reaper forces didn't know what hit them. And seriously, who puts explosives in a fish tank? Approaching that final push, it appears all hope is lost. Harbinger has landed and begins cutting down anyone that gets close. In a final bid to stop the carnage and give our heroes that precious opportunity, Admiral Hackett sends his cruiser on a collision course and Harbinger isn't aware, focusing on the ground units until it's too late. With Harbinger disabled, at least temporarily, Shephard orders the injured piled into a waiting Normandy, allowing Shephard one last goodbye before the final dash. We see Harbinger coming back online and slowly standing. The Normandy cannot help. It must escape immediately or be destroyed. Shephard is critically injured and makes his final push. But Harbinger is still there. There's no reason for it to leave, and it doesn't. Maybe Leviathan shows up to deliver the final blow. The point is, given Harbinger's existence as a final bad guy, we need to see it fall. To honor the plot, we can keep most of the rest intact. Anderson's shot, the elusive man commits suicide, and Shephard is lifted into the sky. We'll get side moments where it's revealed that everyone in the Citadel is actually alive, trapped in their city. This is a safe assumption, as Shephard does not encounter any Reaper creations inside the Citadel, just the dead bodies of those sent up the beam. It's likely the Citadel was closed up by the elusive man and teleported to Earth, with the Reapers guarding it without any intention of doing anything with it other than keeping it away from everyone else. It's possible that the population was going to be doomed, but the imminent attack delayed that and saved everyone on board. Back to Shephard. I would prefer a situation similar to Leviathan and, honestly, Deep Space Nine, where Shephard discusses ethics with people he knows, an illusion controlled by the Catalyst. As we all know, the Mass Effect relays and the Citadel were built by the Reapers and left over in each cycle to help the next. It makes sense that there would be a hidden AI within the structure, one aware of the potential the Crucible can cause. No synthesis option. The Catalyst and Shephard have their ethical conversation, but Shephard is not buying it. He calls the Reaper out on its bullshit. I already mentioned the fallacy that the Reapers, being synthetic life forms, wipe out all advanced life in the galaxy to prevent them from creating synthetic life forms that could threaten all life in the galaxy. Someone will counter that a rampant, uncontrolled synthetic organism could eliminate all organic life, and not just the advanced ones, and the Reapers prevent that with their scorched earth technique. They then repeat this thousands of times over millions of years. But did every cycle contain synthetic life? Was there a cycle where the Reapers destroyed a galaxy that was doing well, that had learned on their own the dangers of rampant artificial intelligence? The cycle is clockwork, 50,000 years. The Reapers would see a mature and responsible civilization and wipe them out because it's assumed they would eventually fall to chaos. And of course, you'd have to assume there'd be a cycle where synthetic life has wiped out all life, and the Reapers were too late. Right? The issue is that the Reapers were given a task to solve a problem that in many ways they caused. The original species were, well, let's call them for what they are implied to be, elder gods to the scope of Lovecraft. Monstrous and powerful, they enslaved all of the races who worshipped them as gods. However, these thralls would frequently build synthetics that always rebelled, wiping out that species. The Leviathans created the original Reaper intelligence to solve this dilemma, and its flawed logical conclusion was to wipe out not only the Leviathans, but all thrall races as well. Kind of a mild overreaction on their part. You wouldn't want to invite the Reapers to a party. Puts a lot of pressure on the host. So the cycle then begins with the catalyst claiming that synthetic life rises up each time. But why? Well, let's go all the way back to Mass Effect 1 for that answer.
The pattern has repeated itself more times than you can fathom. Organic civilizations rise, evolve, advance, and at the apex of their glory, they are extinguished. The Protheans were not the first. They did not create the Citadel. They did not forge the mass relays. They merely found them. The legacy of my kind.
Why would you construct the mass relays, then leave them for someone else to find?
Your civilization is based on the technology of the mass relays. Our technology. By using it, your society develops along the paths we desire. We impose order on the chaos of organic evolution. You exist because we allow it, and you will end because we demand it.
So what? Is Sovereign implying that the Reapers themselves are guiding the new younger species? If they could, why don't they prevent the rise of synthetic life? Or wipe out synthetic life when it happens? They don't. Rather, by surmising Sovereign's claim, the Reapers manipulate new races to become the very problem only the Reapers can solve. Holy shit. So when I claim repeatedly about the flaws in the game's final logic, it's rooted in this idea. The Reapers manipulate races to follow a certain path that would eventually lead to chaos, requiring them to annihilate those races to restore order. And despite evidence gathered over the entire series from EDI to Legion and the Geth, the Catalyst ignores all of this and is never outright accused of creating the very problem it was designed to solve. Rather, it forces us to play by its, well, game. By offering choices we cannot alter. We're manipulated to the very end. They even engineer the sacrifice we are forced to endure. No wonder fans hated this ending so much. It literally makes no sense. Well, back to our version. The Catalyst flatly says it's prepared to use the energy of the Crucible to enact Scorched Earth, the destruction of everything, organics and synthetics, Reapers, everything. However, it's a bluff, as fail-safes had been implemented to ensure the destroy option is available. The Crucible then makes one final stab at indoctrination, endorsing the potential of the control ending, a choice Shephard rejects. Finally, the EI relents, but states that if the Reapers are killed, so will all artificial life. Well, turns out, though, we were prepared for that as well. The Reapers have no defense because they were unaware of its power. But we are. Given the help of EDI and the Geth, they created a system to allow them to survive. It's a risk, but one they all knew about going in. Realizing the Catalyst has been outsmarted, it can do nothing but watch as Shephard activates the Crucible and destroys the Reapers. The Normandy doesn't escape. Left floating in space, systems slowly coming back online, Joker looks at EDI's lifeless body, frightened. Then, after a dramatic pause, she comes back online. The plan worked. The fleet report in one by one, the Turians, the Asari, and the Quarians, and, after another dramatic pause, the Geth. Without taking a second to celebrate, Joker turns the Normandy around and returns to Earth. The Citadel is revealed to be intact but disabled. The Normandy lands, and all the surviving companions, and there's quite a few still by this point, search for Shephard. Given the Crucible is still attached, the hidden recesses of the Citadel are now visible. Everyone descends into the depths of the station's never-before-seen section. There, they find the destroyed rubble and the collapsed control room. They find Anderson, dead, and a mountain of debris assumed to be where Shephard was when the Crucible activated. Our companions begin to mourn. Anderson is taken away, and Shephard's love stares at the rubble. Most everyone else turns to leave. But not that one individual. That love rejects the possibility of Shephard's death and begins senselessly digging through the mountain of rubble. It appears hopeless. Then someone joins them. But who? Well, it's Rex, of course. Throughout the series, outside of Tali, Rex is likely the most loyal to Shephard. Consider this. I mentioned Shephard saves Tally's world. Well, Shephard cured the genophage and rescued one of the last fertile female Krogans. Shephard means everything to Rex, and be sure that if one person starts digging, Rex will join them, frantically burrowing with his superior strength. Eventually, everyone else follows. They all join in digging through the rubble. Now, why is this important, narratively? Why would I choose this course of action? Well, remember the end of the first game / season? Sovereign is destroyed, a single piece flies into the Presidium.
Captain Anderson, we found them. They're in here.
Take it easy. It's over. You're safe now. Where's the commander?
Anderson speaks to your companions, and there's a solitary moment where you're led to believe Shephard had been killed, buried under rubble. Then, without help from no one, Shephard pulls himself free. Shephard has been saving their friends for years, and rarely do they return the favor. Shephard never gave up on them, and now, at this final moment, they won't give up on Shephard. Together they dig at the rubble until a body is found, one that suddenly takes a breath. I honestly like this ending, and not just because Shephard lives. The entire last act presented here is predicated by the belief that in the end, our characters and our people work together to outsmart and outthink the Reapers, a preference over the alternative presented in the game where it feels like Shephard is just towed from place to place, always playing catch-up, arriving late, and responding rather than instigating. In the end, everyone was a slave to a system, right up until that final 3-color choice. At no point do we ever get a voice. And that, ultimately, is my problem with the original entire last act. Returning back to our ending, you still have your epilogue. Shephard gets his happy ending, likely to build a home on Rannoch with Tally in my variation. We see everyone living happily ever. You can clearly see there's time left in this video. I should end there, but I won't. There's still this tease for the next Mass Effect, and I promise to explain how the next game can occur without acknowledging canon. Yes, against this entire video talking about narrative choices and potential canonical stories, the end postulates that none of that needs to matter.
But first, as a bit of reflection, why did I make this video? Well, the answer is ADHD, but beyond that, why does Mass Effect resonate where so many other games are quickly forgotten? I just finished playing Far Changing Tides, and that game was amazing. I played it twice, back to back, but I would never do a 2-hour video on it. I'm 47 upon recording this video, and I like to consider mine the best generation, jovially. In truth, it's because we grew up with the explosion of the information age. When I was a child, I played the first Ultima. My friend had an Apple II, while I owned an 8086. Great games at the time included X-Wing and Wing Commander. With that last one, it would eventually embrace mature storytelling with the price of freedom. A genuinely fantastic game I remember completing like 3 times. And I would put titles like BioShock, Shadow of the Colossus, Silent Hill 2, Inside, near the top. I absolutely adore Homeworld, its follow-up Cataclysm, Homeworld 2, and even Deserts of Karak. Dishonored had me attempting to complete the game without a single death, and I found the story in the new Wolfensteins by Machine Games engrossing. I love all 3 Dead Space. Yes, I said all 3. Probably the best written game I've played in a really long time was Frictional's underappreciated Soma. These are games that resonate with me years later. On occasion, I will turn to YouTube to just enjoy someone else's playthrough so I can experience the story, and as the experiences are entirely generalized, my story is no different than those found online. Mass Effect is different. I looked forward to capturing these videos the first time I attempted them because these experiences felt unique to me, not just because Shephard looked different. While many choices were near identical, they did not perfectly match. Despite my love for these other games, they didn't have me purchase remastered versions 10 years later, involving a 90-hour replay and a subsequent compulsion to write a 20,000-word video essay detailing my thoughts on it. No other game will encourage such a reason, none before, and I doubt none ever will. You can imagine my reaction, then, regarding the announcement of a new entry.
In this trailer, we see a shot of Andromeda. We see the damage relays, which occur in every ending. Then we see Liara, who I might repeat would be the only character impossible to kill. There's been some speculation that she appears older, but this could be an element of CGI. So, what can this mean? Well, there are several possible options to explain what is going to happen. Option 1. It takes place immediately after Mass Effect 3. This is unlikely as it forces 2 possible directions. The first is that it imposes a canon option, which, as this entire video has shown, does occur despite denials to the contrary, but this would be the first time they openly locked in a path. As mentioned, Mass Effect implies a canon story through triage and a healthy amount of railroading, but to follow this direction would etch it in stone, which would be highly controversial. To make matters worse, as we've seen through this video, it's likely that designers would lock down choices that a large ratio of its fanbase didn't make, and to rob them of their continuity would be an offense so severe many of them wouldn't even bother playing in the new game. The second involves forcing the developers to a level of production unforeseen. It would take years and hundreds of gigabytes to offer every variation that could feed off the events of Mass Effect 3. As stated, this is highly unlikely, so given both options are dubious, I think it's safe to say option 1 is unlikely. Option 2, it takes place hundreds of years after Mass Effect 3. This one honestly seems likely for a variety of reasons. For one, the shot of Andromeda points to a plot that includes the previous game in some way. Now, those that actually played that game to completion will know that despite the majority of the game containing an entirely new story, minor spoilers here, a conspiracy connects it with events that occurred back in the previous trilogy. Additionally, as Andromeda had all its DLC cancelled, numerous unanswered questions are left to be addressed. Setting the story potentially 700 or more years in the future, as Andromeda begins 634 years after departing on their journey, creates numerous opportunities. Given Asari are one of the longest-lived races in the galaxy, only Liara would be alive. But how would someone still not lock down canon from the previous trilogy? I did say you wouldn't need to, a fact that literally everyone creating videos on YouTube has disagreed with. They all have assumed that the Destroy ending will be canonized. Others have extended this supposition by claiming that the Liara, as a love interest, would be locked down, and theorized the return of Shephard. Once again, like the last option, to do so would force choices the vast majority of fans didn't make. There is a way to move forward without necessarily locking down events in the trilogy. As every other character would have died of old age, this is not something to worry about. And most consequences literally would have aged out by this point. All the dozens of smaller decisions that resonated through the trilogy would have died off. This leaves in truth only 4 hard-to-answer questions. What happened to the Reapers? What happened to the Krogan? What happened to the Quarian-Geth conflict? What happened to Shephard? I believe all of these can in fact be answered during the introduction of the next game, with only a few minutes of added dialogue, all from Liara, likely as she narrates the current timeline. Destroy. The Reapers were destroyed, their bodies repurposed, the relays were repaired. It took decades to restore the galaxy as it was before, but in truth, the scars would take much longer. Control. In a flash, the Reapers halted their attack. Their disposition flipped instantly, and instead of wiping out life, they began to rebuild what they had destroyed. After years of their custodianship, after they reversed the damage inflicted, they departed and returned to dark space, where they were never heard from again. Many of us don't know why they changed their minds, but I know. Synthesis. In a wash of energy across the galaxy, every living being, organic or synthetic, merged, paving the way for a utopian future where war would become obsolete. Those first few centuries were indeed idealistic. In time, the visible element of our new nature faded. With each passing generation, the light dimmed. We're all still touched by what happened that day, but that influence diminished to a whisper many of us no longer listen to. The Krogan, Quarian, and Geth would be undoubtedly a lot more difficult to explain. An easy way to do this would be, as Mass Effect 2 did with specific characters, relegate all these races to the background, only seen on occasion and not represented as companions. It wouldn't be too difficult to place or remove random background characters. And if the designers wanted to introduce a few of them, they could, of course. They might have been brought over back from Andromeda. And while I know technically the Geth weren't part of that expedition, exceptions could be made. Finally, we get to Shephard, once again explained away by a single passing moment of dialogue. We never saw Shephard again, but his legend lives on, even to this day. I made sure of that. While the legend lives on, I knew and loved the man. He had died before. It takes a lot to keep someone like that down. No one was happier than Tali. I know they returned to Rannoch, built their home. They offered him everything, position, power. Personally, though, I think he just wanted to rest. I was envious. They had an amazing view. No one was happier than Garrus. I knew they returned to Palaven to rebuild. I'd often seen news of the restoration. It took a lifetime to rebuild, but those two were together for all of it. No one was happier than me. While we were tempted to return to Thessia, there were countless mysteries yet to solve, people to help. I thought I would outlive him, but his legend would undoubtedly survive long after I've been forgotten. Our legacy will continue with our actions and our children. Now, of course, given that latter point, we don't need to ever see Shepherd's children, regardless of whom they were with, and let's be honest, few surviving Shepherds would spawn offspring. Technically, only a human mate would result in a potential lasting lineage, and I do stress potential. While exhibiting traits of the non-Asari parent, Asari children are 100% Asari. This point is stressed in a side conversation with another Asari in Mass Effect 2. The non-Asari parent is technically not a parent. Despite a desire, children with either Tali or Garrus are impossible. Ignoring any genetic compatibility, the issue stems from the mirror chemistry exhibited with Turians and Quarians. To put it simply, and I'm quoting, many of the molecules required for life have the property known as chirality, or handedness. They're not the same as their mirror image, like a left shoe that will not fit appropriately on your right foot no matter how you rotate it. That wouldn't have been much of a problem if not for the one insignificant fact that many of the stuff our bodies are made of, mainly the amino acids, which are the building blocks for the proteins we consist of, are chiral. And all multicellular organisms on Earth are made of L or levo amino acids. Dextro amino acids are used in the assembly of these two alien races. Now, I'm sure Turian brandy is good, but Tali doesn't require dextro alcohol to get drunk because ethanol doesn't have this property. Regardless, no babies. With all that out of the way, it wouldn't be challenging to create a scenario where the subsequent Mass Effect is set 700 years in the future and be a proper sequel without canonizing anything that occurred in Mass Effect. I mean it. Literally everyone on YouTube talking about this has basically declared it as fact, and I think it's a false assumption. However, creating a story like this results in one obvious conclusion. The loudest complaint people have with Mass Effect 3 was the belief that our choices ultimately didn't matter, explaining that ending away in a minute of dialogue in a sequel that carries a continuity divorced from anything in the previous trilogy only enforces the idea that none of the grandiose choices Shephard made resonated in the long term. So wait, are you saying nothing mattered? Ultimately, everything we did, even the final choice, was pointless? Well, yeah. I hate to break it to you. We never really matter. Nothing we do resonates for very long. When we make decisions, are we genuinely thinking they'll echo for 1,000,000 years? Hell, we see family lines fade out after a couple of generations. The need to leave a lasting impact upon the world is usually reserved for narcissists, those that will do anything to be remembered, regardless if it's a series of great works, or more likely, genocide. Shephard never came off as someone compelled to a lasting impact upon the galaxy. Was it mandatory that he needed to be remembered? What if that ending concluded with Shephard being wiped from the memory of every living being, save his friends? He would win, but no one outside of a handful would know of it. Would we be okay with it? I think so, yes. At the end of the day, we wanted Shephard's choices to matter. We wanted them to reverberate through time. Where I think people got confused is to the extent that influence would have. In a billion years, no one will remember Shephard. Nothing will have mattered. And that's not the point. Remember that quote from earlier?
Evolution has yet to transcend that simple barrier. We can care deeply, selflessly, about those we know, but that empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight.
In the end, Shephard did matter. Their choices carried permanence, and the consequences were severe and impactful, but they only mattered to those important, those around Shephard. Remember, by the end of Mass Effect 3, there are something like 40 different characters whose fates lie in your hands. Their loves and their very lives can be decided. Many of them can survive the events of the trilogy based solely on your actions. These are people you love, those that love you. And in the end, isn't that enough? For me, it is. Which is why the original ending of Mass Effect 3 soured me so much. It wasn't as much the plot holes and the unresolved questions, but rather the uncertain outlook regarding our character and those we cared about. When gamers demanded a happy ending, it was because that group of people, that family we formed, was all that really mattered. Shephard didn't save the galaxy. He saved these people, and the fact that we couldn't share that life with them upset us. In the end, that's my hope for the future. Give Shephard a denouement, a finale that was denied to them. Then move on with a new story. I don't need Commander Shephard to return. I don't need my choices to resonate 1,000 years in the future. All we wanted was closure.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you have reached this far, I can't promise other long-form essays like this on the channel, especially as I have a full-time writing job and these videos don't pay. That being said, please like and subscribe, and perhaps this won't be an isolated video.